What I'm doing here is starting a new video series. There's some things that I would like to change about some basic features of Treebard. I already changed them, but I want to change them some more, or change them again, or change them back a little bit, not all the way back. This may look familiar to some of you. If you've been following, you notice we're mocking up a events table here, which is something that appears on the person tab. It's the very first thing you see. Sort of the centerpiece of Treebard. I've rewritten it several times. Let me show you what Treebard looks like right now, because I've decided to change a few things. I don't really want to change the way it looks. It looks good. Open up the sample tree. Takes a few seconds. You see all that flashing? For example, if we change to a different person, you see that flashing? This may or may not change, but kind of like for it to. Let's go to colors and change the color scheme. See how long that's taken? It didn't used to take a long time. When I fixed the color scheme feature, I didn't break it, I fixed it. I made it better in some ways, but it's slow. What I did was I made the code easier to read and work on, but mainly I made the code shorter. There's less lines of code by far, way less lines of code. So that's one reason it's easier to use for the developer. Problem is, I found out after I went to all that trouble, and that was a considerable amount of trouble, because I had to keep trying. In order to rewrite something that's good, you got to try over and over, because it doesn't get better easily. It was good, and it worked good, but it was a little bit tricky to work with for the developer. That's me. So I got a wild hair to rewrite it and make it simple. Well, I made the code a lot shorter, and it works a lot different, but it's now very inefficient and slow. So when you change persons or change colors or both, then you got this wait, this few seconds of wait while you see all the widgets flashing different colors and stuff. I'd like to change not all the way back, but I'd like to use the best of what I've found out by rewriting it over and over the past 5.5 years. It's one of the first things I made. There's something else I want to fix. There are some things about it that are broken. You see there's some errors here. We have something called kin tips. When you point at a birth event or an offspring event, you get a tooltip that shows the parents. Parents are up here. But down here, you really have any clue which is the birth parent. Well, we can look up here and find out. Now, for offspring, this is actually his children. So Patricia and Katrina, but we don't know which is which here. And normally, when you point at this, you get a tooltip that says, well, is it Patricia? Is it Katrina? It'll tell you which. Adoption. This is Jeremiah, our main guy here. This is an adoption. So here is his parents for his adoption. But normally when you point at this, you get a tooltip right here that shows you the names of the parents, so you don't have to keep looking back and forth between these two places. For a wedding, you would get the spouse's name, so you don't have to go up here and try to figure out which spouse. Say if he had more than one spouse up here or partner, then which one is it? By the way, there is a tooltip and it's up here, but there's a problem with it. You see it's making two. It works fine on a first person, but then after you change the current person, it stops working right. It opens twice, and the second one won't close. This was going to be a do-over because I couldn't make it work. It was showing right here. And then I changed everything about it. I didn't put it up here on purpose. I just haven't positioned it yet. But it's still doing the same thing. So I got a little disgusted and decided, hey, what the heck? I'm going to rewrite this table again. Because another problem, it's not a problem, but it's not good enough for me. We have changed not so very long ago, within the past couple of years. These used to be entries. You tab into it and you start typing immediately. You can't do that now. You have to double click it, open this overlay widget where you type your new information and click OK, which works, but it makes everything more complicated and it makes it harder for the user. The reason I did it is so that I could do this. This is a multi-line label. When I was using entries here, because this is an entry, you can type into it, but this is a label. You can't type into it. I'm typing right now and nothing's happening. When this was an entry, you just type your changes and move on. You just tab through here and type a change and move on. Now you got to do all this, double click and type, and then tab over to the right button or grab the mouse and click the right button. The reason I did that is because labels will show the multi-lines, whereas before, when it was an entry, this long text was stretched from here to here, and this whole app stretched all the way across this long screen. All of that is fairly acceptable, but the Tkinter's not working and acting extremely strange. And I spent hours and hours on this more than once. Something here is unacceptable, and on top of the fact that I made it harder for the user to use Treebard, something's got to change. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going back to use entries, but I'm going to use a so-called text widget, which is Tkinter's. Basically, it's a multi-line entry, but it's big. It can be big. It doesn't have to be big. Open up Notes. This is an entry widget. You can type into it. This is a text widget. You see it's multiple lines. This is only one line. So I'm going to use one of these, but then I'm going to make it a lot smaller, obviously. I've hesitated to do this. I use the label instead of the text because the label is one of the simplest widgets in Tkinter, and the text is one of the most complicated widgets in Tkinter. It's a little harder to use, but I'm going to do it. So I've created a minimalized, this is a model for redoing the events table. And I stayed up too late last night making this as a basis, and then we're going to go from here. And we're going to keep the camera running while we do it. And then this will be a new series about creating a GeneWare app from scratch, because that's kind of what we're doing. We're starting with a very minimal model here, and we're just going to keep adding to it and adding to it until it looks like this but works a lot better and is easier for the user to use. In other words, you will tab into it and start typing. Okay, tab into that, start typing. None of this opening up the overlay and blah blah blah. I don't think it's going to be easy, but we're going to make it as easy as possible by starting with a simple model instead of making changes in this big app here. Okay, along with starting our new series about writing a genealogy application from scratch, rewriting the events table, redo the color scheme so it's efficient. We're going to have a table including getting the kin tips to run before we try to put it in the big app. There's something else I do that I'd like to change. Years ago, I had this brainstorm. It was just a clever idea. I thought, wow, that's an interesting and clever idea. What I decided was I was fixing to rewrite the events table, which I've done several times, and I had this clever idea that instead of destroying widgets when I redraw the table with different data in it, I would reuse existing widgets and I would keep them in a pool of existing widgets, and I would make like 2,500 widgets to go into the table, and I would usually only use some of them. Oftentimes you only use a few of them. And then when you're done with them, you just put them back in the pool and you don't use them until you need them again. This actually, it was just a thought. And then it worked, so I kept it all these years, and I think it would simplify the code if I didn't do that. I know it's not necessary. That's what I'm saying. It does create some code that's not actually necessary, and I don't do it anywhere else. I've got lots of tables in Treebard, and anytime I'm redrawing a table, I destroy all the old widgets, and because the next table is going to be different size. So you have to kind of destroy all your widgets and start over. And that's what I feel like I should be doing, because otherwise I've got this odd code that's kind of weird and different. I'm going to undo that too. I definitely want to start with a new model and not just go in here and start tearing things down, because it's a little too complicated to do that. That's the goal. See that flashing? I think I can get rid of that by making the colorizer scheme more efficient instead of having my goal be fewer lines of code. I never use bright colors, but you can if you want. You make your own color schemes if you want. I really like the dark blue. It's my favorite. There's several of them. You can make more. I'm not getting rid of this. This is staying. This isn't the part that I'm objecting to. What I'm objecting to is the fact that it takes 1001, 1002, 1003, 1000. It takes over 3 seconds for this to happen, and it did not used to do that. It used to take less than a second, and you just kind of wait just a second, and boom, it's done. So we'll get started on this project in the next movie, and I'll see you then.